What does it mean to believe? Not just to recite the creeds or show up once a week and mouth the hymns, not to memorize the rules or wear the right symbols around your neck. No. What does it really mean? To believe in something so fully that it reshapes you from the inside out, that it changes how you see the world, how you treat other people, how you carry yourself when no one's watching. Real belief isn't about ritual. It's about transformation. It's about conviction that takes root in the heart and bears fruit in the life. Not just something you claim, but something that claims you. Something you live, even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. So here's the question. Can that kind of belief, deep, personal, soul-altering, ever be forced? Can it be legislated into existence? Can it be beaten into someone with shame or fear? Can it be written into a law book and expected to grow in someone's heart like a seed in the soil? The obvious answer is no. Real belief has to be chosen, accepted, wrestled with, nurtured. So why? Why do so many people keep trying to force it? Why do we keep confusing obedience with conviction? Why do we keep assuming that if we can just make everyone behave in a certain way, then belief will follow? And maybe the most uncomfortable question of all, what does it say about our own faith if we're not willing to let it speak for itself? If it's so fragile that it needs to be propped up by power? So let's talk about this impulse, the need to coerce belief. Because it's not just a misunderstanding of faith. It's a betrayal of it. At the heart of the most enduring faith traditions lies an invitation, not a command. It's not a threat. It's not an ultimatum. It's a call, a whisper to the soul that says, "Come, taste, see for yourself." It doesn't demand submission through fear. It offers relationship through love. It doesn't compel. It beckons, because real faith, wherever it appears across history or culture, is never about brute compliance. It's about transformation. And transformation is only possible when it begins within. In Christianity, this is expressed as free will. God may be sovereign, but belief must be chosen. I stand at the door and knock, the gospel says. Not break the door down, not arrest you if you don't answer. Just knock. In Islam, niyyah, or intention, is what makes any act spiritually meaningful. Without sincerity, the action is hollow. It might satisfy social rules, but it carries no weight before God. In Judaism, wrestling with God is part of the journey. Faith isn't blind obedience. It's a lifelong conversation, full of tension and struggle and honesty. Abraham questioned. Moses protested. Job demanded answers. And none of that was seen as betrayal. It was devotion. In Buddhism, the path to awakening is rooted in inner practice, mindfulness, discipline, compassion, not blind allegiance to dogma. No one else can walk the path for you. There are teachers, yes, but there's no spiritual shortcut, no forced enlightenment. So wherever you look, across centuries, continents, and cultures, the pattern is the same. Faith is personal, voluntary, internal. And yet, again and again, we see it twisted into something that it was never meant to be. A weapon for power, a hammer for conformity, a political project disguised as spiritual concern. when lawmakers pass bills designed to codify a narrow version of moral order, or when school boards ban books in the name of protecting children. But what they're really doing is insulating a worldview from challenge. When activists demand that prayer be reimposed in classrooms, not as a personal practice, but as a public mandate. These aren't defenses of faith. They are disfigurements of it. They strip faith of its soul and turn it into something ugly, an instrument of control. Because the moment you force it, it's no longer faith. It's performance. It's submission. It's fear in holy drag. And here lies the deepest contradiction. If your faith is so powerful, why does it need the state to enforce it? If it's so compelling, why must it be imposed? If it's truly sacred, why are you trying to make people pretend they believe, instead of showing them a life worth imitating? The answer, of course, is it's uncomfortable. Because coercion is easier than inspiration. And because, in many cases, the people doing the enforcing aren't living out the faith they claim to be defending. Let's be honest about what's happening when we try to force faith through law, custom, or threat. It's not belief, it's compliance. At best, it's performance. At worst, it's spiritual hostage-taking. Because belief, true belief, is not something you can exact at gunpoint or demand by decree. You can force someone to kneel, but that doesn't mean their heart bows with them. You can ban books, but that won't stop someone from wondering what they said. You can mandate prayers in a classroom, but that won't make them sacred. It just makes them mandatory. And the moment something sacred becomes mandatory, it begins to rot. Because the power of faith has never been its ability to dominate others. Its power is in its ability to change us, voluntarily, inwardly, slowly, and sometimes painfully. But coercion skips all that. It skips the journey. It skips the struggle. It skips the doubt, the wrestling, the questioning that every real believer knows as part of the path. It goes straight to control. And when you substitute control for conviction, what you're left with is a hollow shell. The rituals might still be there, the words, the signs, the slogans, but the soul has left the building. And yet, we keep trying to do it. We keep confusing conformity with faithfulness. Why? Because fear is easier to manufacture than love. You can make someone afraid in an instant. But love takes time. It requires presence, vulnerability, patience. It grows. Fear, on the other hand, demands no such investment. You just need enough leverage, enough shame, enough power. But here's the truth that faithful traditions, at their best, have always pointed out. Fear is not the foundation of real faith. In fact, many of the scriptures warn us directly. Perfect love casts out fear. Do not be afraid. Fear not, for I am with you. Again and again, the message is clear. Fear is not the soil in which faith grows. It's often the weed that chokes it. And yet, when belief is legislated through so-called morality laws, censorship boards, culture war campaigns, fear is the method. Obey or else. Fit in or be cast out. Parrot the words or lose your job, your community, your place in the world. And let's be clear, this isn't just a philosophical error. It's a spiritual wound. Because when you replace the slow, sacred work of inner transformation with the blunt force of external pressure, You hollow out the very thing religion claims to care most about, the human heart. And once you abandon the heart, you've already lost the soul of the whole thing. You can't legislate your way into someone's conscience. You can't pass a bill that changes someone's capacity to love. You can't police your way into someone's trust in the divine. Faith doesn't work like that. It never has. So when people try to impose belief by legal means, they're not spreading faith. They're burying it. They're trading the mystery of transformation for the machinery of power. And that trade doesn't just damage the person being coerced. It damages the one doing the coercing. Because every time we reach for control instead of compassion, we're testifying to the weakness of our own belief. We're showing that we don't trust it to speak for itself. We don't trust it to move hearts without force. We don't trust it to survive without the scaffolding of state power. But if your belief can't stand on its own, then maybe it's not belief at all. Maybe it's just fear, dressed up in religious language. At its core, coercion isn't just misguided. It's lazy, spiritually lazy. It's what happens when we stop doing the hard, vulnerable work of embodying our values and instead demand that others conform to the appearance of belief without ever wrestling with its meaning. Let's be honest, it's far easier to make others bend than to discipline ourselves. It's easier to pass a law than to live a life worth emulating. It's easier to condemn someone else's behavior than to confront your own contradictions. It's easier to say, they're the problem, than to ask, what am I not seeing in myself? This is the paradox at the heart of coercive religion. It claims to hold moral authority, but it avoids moral responsibility. It declares that others must change while refusing to be transformed itself. And that's not holiness. That's not faith. That's not love. That's control. And control in this context is almost always fear. Fear disguised as righteousness. Because we don't try to control what we trust. We try to control what we fear. Think about it. If you genuinely believe in the power of your faith, its beauty, its depth, its capacity to redeem, why would you ever need to force someone into it? You wouldn't. You'd let your life speak. You'd let your example shine. But coercion reveals something deeper, something uncomfortable. When someone tries to control another person's faith, it often reveals a deep anxiety about their own. Because if you truly trust that your beliefs are rooted in something real, something transcendent, something eternal, then you don't need to threaten, shame, or legislate anyone into agreement. You trust the truth to hold. But when you're afraid your belief won't hold up under scrutiny, when you're afraid that others might live differently and not be damned for it, then coercion becomes attractive. It's not about the soul of another. It's about the insecurity in your own. And here's the tragic irony. The more we reach for coercion, the more we damage the very thing we claim to protect. Because every act of forced religion empties it of meaning. It becomes ritual without reverence, conformity without conviction, noise without depth. You can't scare someone into spiritual maturity. You can't shame someone into enlightenment. The only path that leads to anything real is the harder one, the inner one. The one where we look in the mirror. The one where we surrender control, not seize it. The one where we live the kind of life that makes others wonder, where did that peace come from, that strength, that joy? The people who do that, the ones whose presence feels like truth lived out, They never need to force anyone. They invite people in without ever having to say a word. That's the opposite of spiritual laziness. That's the hard work of love. We need to talk about the culture war because it isn't what it pretends to be. It parades itself as a battle for values, a defense of the good, the true, and the beautiful, a stand for faith in the public square. But peel back the slogans, and what you find is something older, darker, and more familiar. You find idolatry. Not the kind with golden calves or carved statues, though that would be more honest. This is subtler, smoother, branded for modern sensibilities. This is the kind of idolatry where we take something sacred and bend it into a blunt instrument, where we lift up the symbols of faith while ignoring the substance, where we use religion not to heal but to hurt, not to inspire but to impose. Because when we weaponize religion to dominate the culture, when we turn it into a tool for enforcing conformity, controlling narratives, or winning elections, we're not worshiping God, whatever your view of that is. We're worshiping power. And power, when elevated above truth, becomes its own God. We don't say it that way, of course. We wrap it in the language of righteousness. We call it a defense of Judeo-Christian values or traditional morality. But when you look at the methods, censorship, propaganda, fear-mongering, punitive legislation, public shaming, it becomes clear. This isn't about holiness. It's about hegemony. And that's the heart of the contradiction. Because faith, at its best, is an invitation to surrender the ego, to relinquish control, to love even your enemy, to forgive the unforgivable, to welcome the stranger, to walk humbly, love mercy, and do justice. But the culture war asks us to do the opposite. It asks us to win, to crush, to dominate the narrative, to purify the public square of anyone who doesn't conform. That isn't faith. That's factionalism with a halo. It's the cross draped in a flag, the pulpit turned into a podium, the scriptures mined for ammunition rather than wisdom. It's the substitution of ideology for theology, where political allegiance becomes the measure of belief, and moral certainty becomes an excuse to stop listening. And the truly dangerous part, it feels religious. It uses the right vocabulary. It quotes the right verses. It sings the right hymns. But it's hollow. It's performance. It's a shadow of the sacred, a religion emptied of grace and filled with grievance. And make no mistake, when we use religion to win, we stop asking how we should live and start asking who we should defeat. That's how we turn prophets into pundits, saints into slogans, community into tribalism. Suddenly, what we once saw as sacred tradition becomes a brand, a lifestyle accessory, a litmus test, a hammer. And when the public square becomes a battleground for whose God can be the most aggressively represented, we're not elevating religion, we're cheapening it. We're turning it into a spectacle, into theater, into content. And in the process, we lose the very thing that made it sacred in the first place. Because God doesn't need us to be culture warriors. God calls us to be peacemakers. And that means laying down our need to dominate and picking up the much harder task of loving our neighbors, even when they vote differently, believe differently, live differently. Especially then. Here's the deepest irony of all. We were warned, again and again, across time and tradition. The sacred texts, the mystics, the prophets, they all sounded the alarm. They told us that the greatest danger to faith wouldn't come from the outsider, the skeptic, the heretic, but it would come from within, from the religious institutions, the power-hungry leaders, the self-righteous gatekeepers who traded spiritual depth for social control. They warned us that when religion becomes a tool of coercion, it ceases to be religion at all. Let's take a closer look. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the prophets stand almost entirely outside the religious establishment. They aren't defenders of the temple system. They're critics of it. Isaiah, Amos, Micah, Jeremiah, they didn't call for stricter ritual adherence or more moral policing. They cried out against empty ritual, shallow piety, and injustice done in God's name. I hate your festivals. I despise your solemn assemblies, says God through Amos. Let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like the ever-flowing stream. The problem wasn't secular culture. It was performative faith. Jesus of Nazareth, continuing in that prophetic lineage, didn't rail against the unbelievers. He didn't take up arms against the Roman Empire. His harshest words were for the religious elite, for the scribes and the Pharisees who made religion a spectacle and a burden. He flipped the tables at the temple, not to make a statement about taxes or trade, but to condemn the way worship itself had been commercialized, turned into a transaction, a tool of manipulation. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in the people's faces, he says in Matthew's Gospel. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. And then there's the prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him, who also stood against hypocrisy in his time. The Quran repeatedly emphasizes the hollowness of external displays of piety when they're disconnected from justice and compassion. The fast, the prayer, the pilgrimage are all meaningless if they are not rooted in sincerity, in niyyah, and followed by care for the poor, the orphan, the stranger. Woe to those who pray, but are heedless of the prayer, those who make a show of devotion, but withhold even the smallest kindness. From the Surah Al-Ma'un. It is not belief that is to be condemned. It's the coercive performance of belief, the kind that masks injustice with ritual, that wears holiness like a costume while leaving the heart untouched. The Buddha, too, spoke with clarity against attachment to dogma. He warned his disciples not to confuse his teachings for the truth itself. Just as a raft is useful for crossing a river, it is not to be carried once the other shore is reached. So too are doctrines, tools for liberation, not objects of worship. He saw how easily even wisdom could become weaponized when clung to rigidly, when used to elevate oneself and belittle others. He understood that coercion often grows not out of cruelty, but out of spiritual insecurity, masked as certainty. In every age, the real spiritual voices, those rooted in love, in truth, in mystery, have said the same thing. You cannot force someone into communion with the divine. You can't legislate love. You can't mandate reverence. You can't threaten someone into awakening. To pretend to believe under threat of punishment is not faith. It's trauma. To demand piety from others instead of cultivating it within is not righteousness. It's pride. And both, whether you're the one doing the forcing or the one being forced, result in harm. It's spiritual violence, because it teaches people to lie with their mouths while their hearts scream silently inside. It teaches children that God is angry and fragile, always watching and ready to strike. It teaches adults to confuse control with conviction, certainty with depth, conformity with peace. And in the end, it doesn't just wound the one being coerced. It corrupts the soul of the one who coerces. So we were warned over and over again, from desert prophets to mountaintop mystics. The question is, are we listening? Or are we flipping the script, casting ourselves as the guardians of righteousness while silencing the very voices that tried to set us free? So what's the alternative? Live your values. Don't impose them. Not with a megaphone or a mandate or a moral scoreboard, but with your choices, with your patience, with your compassion when no one's looking. Let your life be your witness. Let your gentleness be your strength, because gentleness requires more strength than dominion ever did. Let your humility be your authority, because humility doesn't need a pulpit or a platform to be heard. And let your questions be as sacred as your answers, because curiosity is often the birthplace of wisdom. If your faith is real, you don't need to force it on anyone. It will speak for itself in how you live, in how you love, in how you treat the people you are not required to care about. Because real transformation doesn't come through coercion. It comes through invitation. And the deepest truths, the ones that reshape a soul, are rarely shouted. They're whispered, modeled, lived. You don't need to conquer the world to change it. You just need to embody the truth you claim to believe, to walk it, quietly, boldly, consistently. Until people don't just hear your convictions, they feel them. Not because you imposed them, but because you became them. Coercion isn't just bad politics. It's bad religion. Because the moment we try to force someone to believe, it stops being faith. It becomes performance, compliance, fear. The shell of something sacred, hollowed out by control. If God, however you understand the divine, wanted robots, we wouldn't have been given the terrifying, beautiful burden of freedom. We'd simply obey, mechanically, predictably, without doubt, without choice, without meaning. But we were made differently. We were made with the capacity to wrestle, to wonder, to walk away, and still be welcomed back. This is not a glitch in the system. This is the system. And with that freedom comes a responsibility. Not to wield our faith like a sword to strike down or a leash to restrain, but to wear it like a garment. Something close to the skin, something familiar and lived in. Not a uniform to show off, but a second skin that moves with us through joy and grief, certainty and confusion. Soft, honest, worn daily. Faith isn't about control. It never was. Control is what we reach for when we're scared. But faith asks us to release that grip, to trust, to hope, to walk forward, even when the path disappears in the fog. And trust, like love, can never be forced. It has to be offered freely. It has to be earned slowly. It has to be lived quietly. Because the deepest kind of belief isn't something you can make someone else feel. It's something they see in you and begin to wonder if, maybe, it's possible for them too.